Welcome back, folks. This is the final video in our series, and it will be dealing with using PHP to connect that database that we created in the last video back to our website. Now, right from the beginning, remember we're doing this under MAMP and we're doing this in the HT docs folder. So if I open up that docs folder, I've got a folder in there called address book. I did suggest you use the same names as me so that you don't get confused. If you changed it, if that's anything different, then you need to remember what you changed it to. I'm going to go in there. When we did the JavaScript, we created this folder called scripts and put in main.js. So you can see that that's reflected here in the file system. We've got our styles, which should have our reset and our main.css, etc. That's all happening in here. Now, the reason we did it in our htdocs folder is that when we run MAMP, which is what we're going to do next, and our servers come up, Apache will be serving the website from the htdocs folder. So if I go into my browser and I simply type localhost into the address, now, and it's trying to give me a suggestion, I'm going to get rid of that. If I just type localhost into the address, then I'm going to see something that looks like this. So back in the htdocs, I'll just minimize this. Back in htdocs, you can see that the folder itself has an index.php and this image. That's exactly what you're seeing served here. That's the image, and that's what's in the PHP file. Now, remember that your server might be running on a different port. So if you got an error there, then you need to make sure that you put in the port. And you can check that by simply going back to your web start page. There it is there. And you can look up here and see whether there's a :8888 or some other number. And if that's the case, then every time I talk about, we're still in the database, every time I talk about typing in localhost, you'll have to append your :8888 to that. All right, in that htdocs folder, if that's the root, we call it, of the website, then we've got this folder called address book. So if I go back up in here and put in a /address book, then I should see my address book just the same way I did on the live server. Now, I've used the capital letter because that's what I've used, but this is case insensitive, so it doesn't really matter whether you use the capital or not. You can be lazy and not press the shift key. Now, at the moment, it's still operating the same way as it did before. If I put data in and add the friend, it'll come over here. But if I refresh the page, of course, I'll lose all my friends. We haven't yet connected it back to our permanent storage, what we call our persistent storage. All we've done is that JavaScript that we did in the previous videos. So the job today is to connect it back to our persistent storage. Now, from this point forward, we can't use live server. Live server doesn't work with PHP. However, what we can do is we can leave this open, run our VS Code, and when we make changes, we'll swap back here. We just have to manually refresh. So just keep that in mind. I'll try and remind you as we do it. So let's go into VS Code. And again, VS Code should be opening up exactly where we were last time. There's our JS that we were playing with. There's our index.html. I'm actually going to close those just to keep the focus on what we're currently doing. Missed it. There we go. And here is that file structure we talked about a moment ago. Okay, I'm going to need a new folder at the address book level. So click on address book and make a new folder. And I'm going to call it includes. Now again, this is the style that I use. It's not 100% what you have to do. You'll get your own style as you go along. Not a bad place to start with mine though. Inside that includes, we're going to create a new file called dbheader.php. So this is the first PHP file we've created, and you can see it's using one of PHP's logos. It's actually a MAMP logo, if you will, for a PHP only file. Now what we want to do is we actually want to create this special file that connects us to the database. And once we've got that connection, we can refer back to this file every time we need a connection. Now we're just doing a single page, so we're just going to open up our connection right at the start. And then from then on, we can talk to, read from the database whenever we want. So PHP looks like this. First thing is we need to issue a PHP tag. Now it is, when it's a PHP file like this and all we're going to have in here is PHP, we actually don't need a closing tag. That would be it, but we don't need it. By convention these days, we just leave it open at the end. Now I'm going to create a connection to the database, and I'm going to use some comments to give us a bit of guidance. The first thing I do is database connection details. And then after that, we're going to silently connect to the database or die. Sounds rather dramatic. By die, all we mean is it's going to stop executing any PHP code from that point forward, and I'll demonstrate that for you once we get it up and running. Okay, now I like to do it this way, again, not absolutely necessary, but I like to have everything at the top of my file so that I can very easily change things if things change. So I'm going to set up a number of 4 variables to connect to my database. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up DB host. Now a host in Unix terms is simply a computer. Now let me explain what's going on there. All variables in PHP have to be preceded with a $sign. Not like JavaScript where we can just start with a name. It has to have a $sign in front, and there's a good reason for that you'll see later on. I'm putting localhost in quotes. They can be single or double quotes, doesn't really matter at this stage. There is a difference in PHP, and we'll talk about that when we need to. And you absolutely have to have a semicolon on the end of every PHP statement. So we're going to create DB host, which is going to point to the local host, because that's where our database is running. We're going to need a DB username. I'm just going to call it DB user. And for MAMP, your DB user is root. Next, we're going to need a DB password. I'm just going to call it DB pass. And for MAMP, your password is root. And the last thing we need is the name of the database we're going to connect to. And if you remember from the last video, we called it address book. Now, if you remember when I called it address book like that with the capital B, Windows decided it wasn't important and just made it a lowercase b. If you're working on a Mac, be very careful. Macs are case sensitive, Windows machines are not. So if you created it with a capital B like I did, you must put a capital B here, it simply won't connect. So those are the 4 pieces of information we need to do our connection. I'm going to build this connection string up in several parts. We're simply going to start with the command itself. We're using an extension called mySQL. And these functions from mySQL all look like this. It's mySQL preceding with an underscore and then what you want to do. Now in the bad old days we used to run just plain MySQL. There were some problems with it, some security issues, and it wasn't very powerful, and so they made a version called MySQL Improved. That's where the I comes from. Now in here we're simply going to, and I'm going to do this down in multiple lines, simply going to give it first of all the host name, the username to connect, the password to connect, and then what we want to connect to. Now that will give us a connection. The problem is we can't do anything with that connection just yet. And the reason is we're not saving that connection anywhere. So I'm going to make a new variable called con, short for connection. Now when I refer to con, I'm talking about that pipeline between my PHP code and the MySQL server. And that's basically all you need. The only problem is if there is an issue, it's going to get very verbose, very wordy, and it's going to give you all sorts of error messages and things like that on your website, which you don't want to have. The way to stop that from happening, if there's an error, is to precede this whole command with an @ symbol. So that's the silently part. Now, if it dies, it will just die and give you no information whatsoever, which again is not desirable. So what we can do, we can say either connect or tell PHP to die. And when you get it to die, you can give it a message. Oops, that double quote's not going to work, is it? Let's do single quotes around. No, there we go, that's better. So if we have the wrong name here or whatever and try to connect to it, it's going to say database says no, and that's all that's going to appear on the screen because it's going to stop executing PHP. Right, I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to save that using Windows keys instead of Mac keys. And we have our DB header. From now on, all we have to do is include that, require that we're actually going to use every time we want to connect to the database. And for our app, this app, we only really need to do that on the one page, so that's going to be nice and easy. All right. Next step is actually to get the connection happening in the index.html. And when we do that, I'll show you a few more things about PHP that are quite interesting. Okay, so I have my DB header file that I'm going to use in a minute, and we're back in our index.html. All right, we're going to PHPify it. And what I mean by that is we're going to turn it into a PHP thing. Now, by default, if we want PHP to be in this code anywhere, we have to have a PHP file, not an HTML file. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename the index as index.php. Now when I rename that, it renames it here. You'll notice it automatically renamed it here in the editor, which is very handy. But if we go back over to here and into our address book, you'll find that it's automatically done that here as well, because this is really just a reflection of this. Okay, so now that it's PHP, we can put PHP into it. For instance, we got our form panel and everything. Even before we do all that, how about we just, in the body section, run a little bit of PHP. Now the beauty of PHP is you can use it anywhere inside normal HTML. All you have to do is break into PHP and then close it off again. Remember I said that wasn't necessary on a full PHP page where all of your code is PHP. But where you're mixing HTML and PHP, it's important that you put in the start tag and the end tag. And I'll just give you this one for free. Echo, double quote, and let's do ourselves up. We might as well do an H1. H1, and we'll go, hello, year 10. Okay, so what we're saying here, echo is simply put to the screen, send back this piece of HTML. And that just gets mixed into the HTML just as if we'd written it just as a straight H1. So I'm going to save that. I'm now going to jump back over to my browser, because don't forget we still have that running. And I'm going to hit refresh. And you can see that my H1 automatically comes up at the top there, just as plain HTML. If I went and had a look at I haven't done this for a while, on this browser, page source. If I go and look at the page source, you can see it's just plain HTML. And that's what PHP does. Turns programming code into HTML. Now, PHP, we just did that in this one section. I'll get out of there. I'll jump back to here. We just did that there, but we could actually break it up. And PHP is really, really clever. Right at the top, in fact, we can even do this before the doc type, that doesn't matter. We can scoot into some PHP at the top here and go $name equals, and then something sensible like Mr. Blair. Put a space before that. Don't know if that's important, but I always do. I don't forget the semicolons on the end. So I've got a variable name. I put my own name in it. Let's jump down here now. Where did my other PHP go? There it is. Instead of saying hello to hello to year 10, I'm going to go hello $name. You notice it's a different color. That's why the dollar signs are important. The dollar sign means I'm going to interpret anything after that as a variable. And I'm just going to inject it right here within this text. So if I save that, jump back over and refresh, it's now saying hello Mr. Blair instead of hello year 10. Now I told you we'd look at why double quotes and single quotes are very important for PHP, so let's change this guy from double quotes to single quotes, and you probably already noticed that's no longer a variable. And so save that and go and refresh. Oops, missed. Go and refresh, and you can see it's actually literally putting the text $name up now instead of interpreting that as a variable. So double quotes, anything inside gets interpreted as a variable. Single quotes doesn't. And that's important if you've got things that use a dollar sign, like dollar amounts. You actually don't want it to try and figure out that that's a variable and try and find a value for it, etc. You just can use single quotes and say, I just actually want the dollar sign. All right, let's go back and fix that up. We don't need any of that PHP code. That was just a quick demonstration. But what I will do is I will use the PHP we did at the top to make that connection. Now I've been doing single line PHP, but it doesn't have to be. It can be entire blocks of code like this. And in fact, that's what I prefer. So we've got PHP tags, so let's go and get our DB header. And the way to do that is to require once. Don't have to do it over and over again. Now, when we were doing our style and our script, VS Code was very handy in that it told us where to go and find, we started typing style and it would fill it out for us, and we could go, yes, style, and then it would look inside and find the right style for us. Unfortunately, the PHP linter doesn't do that for us. We actually have to do that ourselves. So we can go require once. In fact, PHP is a bit odd in that this function also, I don't believe, needs the brackets. Now from here, where we are here, we have to go into the includes folder and get DB header. So I'm going to start by typing includes. Oh, it did find it. It hasn't done that. That must be an update. Excellent. Includes DB header. Go into the includes folder and load up DB header. Now what happens is any variables like $con that I've defined here in DB header will now be part of my PHP right the way through this page. Okay, so next step. Down here in my friends, we would like to see a list of all of the people in our database. So instead of just an empty div now, we're going to incorporate some PHP code here to load everything from the database. Okay, so we're going to break into PHP. My machine's getting very laggy for some reason. It's a virtual machine, don't forget, on my Mac. Oh, using Mac keys again. Let's try that once more. Okay, so we're in PHP, we're already connected to our database. And so what we need to do is we need to create a query, get friends from the address book. Once we've done that, we're going to send that query across, execute that query. I like the word dispatch the query to the server. And then we're going to get a resultant table. Now the table we're getting is the table we created before, the addresses table. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to get in a tabular form, not something we can actually read, but in memory, we're going to get a table of all of the friends. And each row of that table is going to contain a different friend's information. So what we're going to do after we get that table back is we're going to loop through the resultant table displaying data for each friend. Now we're going to rely heavily on the JavaScript we've already written to do this because we can bring it across and just adjust it a little bit so it becomes PHP code. Both JavaScript and PHP are C-based languages, C being a programming language of the late 1960s, early 1970s. Most of our computers, the operating system is written in C and other low-level languages. So C was sort of a big boon for the IT industry, and so most of the languages that you use these days are C-based. They use the same syntax. Our for loops that we saw before are all C-based, and it's spelled C, like the letter C, not S-E-A or S-E-E. Okay, so that's our plan of attack. Now, it's looking fine, and you shouldn't be scared of this. It's actually quite easy to do. I'm going to set up another variable here called $query, which is what I like to do, have it nice and clear. See how I do the two quotes and the semicolon at the same time? That way I don't forget anything. We simply want to select everything from addresses. Now remember we made the table addresses, and the star literally means we're going to get everything out of that table. Now I'm going to add one thing to it. I'm going to order by the name field. That way we're going to get them in order of their name. Now I know we're mixing first name, last name, so it'll be the order of their first name, but that's okay. All right, that's the query we need to issue. So let's dispatch that query off to the server. I did it again, didn't I? I really should learn what the fast key is to go to the end of the line. Okay, we're going to dispatch the query and we're going to get the resultant table. In fact, we're going to do that in one, so I'm just going to go back down here. Dispatch the query and get the resultant table. To do that, we're going to say, there's the resultant table. We're going to use the MySQL I extension and we're issuing a query. It's that hard. First thing you need to tell it is your connection to the database. And the second thing you need to write is the query. We've already set that up in that variable. This is why we use variables everywhere, by the way. It just makes things a whole lot simpler later. Okay, now result contains all of the data out of our database. So far for me, that's John Jones. But what we can do is we can create a loop to go through all the data. Now the best loop to go through this data, because we don't know how many items we're going to get, is a while loop. Now the condition in the while is interesting. We're simply going to assign into a row variable. So remember, we're getting each row of the table. Into the row variable, we're going to use mySQL I, and we're going to fetch an array. I'm going to get that from the result table. So what that'll do is it'll get the first row, put that into the variable row. Next time through the loop it'll get that, and it'll keep going until we've run out of data to put into row. But each time row will contain the next row in the resultant table. Now the beauty is when we use fetch array, we can now remember arrays from our JavaScript. The elements, we can use numbers to tell it which element, or we can use numbers as well here, or we can actually use the field names, which is kind of handy. So I'll show you what I mean. We're going to save each row. Into simple variables. Save the row data into simple variables. Now what do I mean by that? Well, remember in our table we have an ID, so I'm going to call it $ID. And I'm going to get out of the current row the ID field. Now I need 6 more of those and I'm lazy, so I'm going to do this oops, I'm using Mac keys again, you'd think I'd learn. Let me just copy that Windows keys this time, Control C, Control V, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got a couple of blank lines there I don't need just yet. Okay, now we don't want ID repeated, this one's going to be name. But don't forget, instead of doing this twice like this, I can double click on this ID and press Control D to get the second one. So when I type address, it fills out both those. Double click here, Control D, and then suburb. Double click here, Control D, and Postus Codus. Double click here, Control D, email, and the final one, phone. Now that we've saved those, which are compound or complex sort of pieces of data, into really simple variables, they're going to be much easier to deal with when we actually make our friend panel, which is the next bit. So to create this friend panel, we're going to do it similarly to the way we did in JavaScript. So in a minute, I'm going to call up my JavaScript. Before that, I'm just going to simply do this. We want to put out to the screen a div class equals friend panel Now we have a bit of a problem. Whoop, should be friend panel, shouldn't it? Have a bit of a problem. Notice the color scheme has changed. It's because we can't have double quotes inside double quotes. What that means is this bit's a string, this bit's code, this bit's a string. And because we've got nothing in between to sort of tell it, it's going to break big time. Now this is a good use for single quotes. How many times have I done that in this video? Good use for single quotes, because everything inside just gets interpreted as plain text. And so that's one of the best places in PHP to do that. And at the end, I'm going to create the closing tag for that, and you might as well do that in single quotes as well. And then of course, everything we're going to be doing from, or everything we did in JavaScript, we're now going to do between those two tags. So I'm going to go over to my scripts, main.js, and I'm going to find this inner HTML stuff. And I'm going to steal it. to go back to my index.php. I'm going to go between the div start and end tags, and I'm going to paste it. Now it's going to look terrible to start with, but the good news is it uses $signs for those templates, and we need $signs for those variables, the name variable, etc. So what we can do now is I can highlight this and put double quotes around it. Probably go out the end and put that quote and get rid of these curly braces, and what I have is perfectly good PHP code. So I'm going to do that here, highlight the whole line, double quotes around it, might as well put the semicolon on the end, slide up to the front. I'm just going to push it across with some tabs and echo it. The only other thing I need to do is get rid of curly braces, otherwise they'll get printed on the screen, which will look silly. Oh well. No curly braces. Get rid of those on the way through this time. And even the button, we can put in as here's a code. Now we're going to do something else with this button in a minute, and it's going to sort of break this whole single quote, double quote thing, but I'm going to show you how we can deal with that in a different way anyway. But don't worry about that just for now, we'll just get this working as is. Alright, so we are in a situation where we have connected to the database, we've issued a query on the database, we've gathered the data, and we have now put it into a friend panel. Now don't forget we're echoing it directly here inside this My Friends. We don't have to add it to it later. It's happening all here on the server before we ever get any HTML. I'm going to save it. I'm going to jump across. I got rid of that and we haven't put anybody in yet, but I'm just going to hit the refresh button. And once it refreshes, you can see that the data from the database is now being displayed straight up without us having to add anything. And of course I can refresh that as many times as I like. Before with the JavaScript only version, that would delete everybody in here, but this is persisted. This is staying on the server in the database. PHP has created all of this in the background and sent it back to Apache as HTML to be fed straight down to my browser. That's how this all works. Now, this add friends won't work just now, or it will, but that won't be persisted. That will just be sitting here from the JavaScript. So our last phase in this is to actually, well, it's not our last phase because we're going to make this delete button work. Still doesn't work. I'm tapping that now. Our second last phase is to actually use PHP then to take the data from the form and send that back to the database and then reload the page. And that's the process. Okay. So in order to do that, we're going to go back to our VS Code. Now everything we want to do as far as displaying is happening here. But what we want to do now is, instead of this form sending this data across to JavaScript, we're going to actually send it to a file, a PHP file. I'm going to come across here and I'm going to go back to address book and make a new folder, and I'm going to call it utils because I couldn't be bothered typing in the whole word utilities. And I'm going to make a PHP file inside utils called add.php to add new users. Just as we did before, we issue the PHP tag the opening tag. And I'll just find it in my notes. Here we go. Okay, so what we want to do is, first of all, remember we said that we wanted to abstract that DB header so we can connect to it whenever we want. We're going to require once. Whoops. Now this one, we've got to come up out of the utils folder, then go to the includes folder, and then pull up DB header. Liking how that's working now. Probably should put some comments in, connect to the database. All right, we're going to get the form data from index.php. We're going to create a new query. This one's going to be an insert query to insert data. We're going to, loving this word, dispatch the query. And the last thing we're going to do is we're actually going to return to the address book page, back to our index.php. Okay. Alright, here we go. Gathering the form data. Now, if you remember, back in index.php, this form is sending its information using the method post. Now, we can gather form data and store it into simple variables again by simply making a variable and then using a global array called $post, $_post, again with the name of the field of the form. And we can copy that 5 more times. 2. Still doing the wrong keys. Control C, Control V. 4. This name, Control D becomes address. This name, Control D becomes suburb. This name, Control D becomes postcode. See why it's easy to keep the same name throughout. Don't change it. You can change it, but you shouldn't. And these don't have to be named that. They could be called Betty, Bill and Harry, for all that matters. Right, so that's the data from the form. And now we have those in simple variables. We can do whatever we like with them within strings. And we're going to again make ourselves a query. And the SQL command, or the SQL query, to insert data starts with insert into addresses. That's where we want to put it. The following values. Now I'm using a shortened form of this. Usually what you do after address is you tell it what field you want to fill out, but we're filling them all out except the ID. And so to put in a auto-incremented ID, if you remember, you can use the default keyword. So that'll tell MySQL, you go and handle that ID for me, I'm not too worried about it. Now, everything else except postcode also needs to be between single quotes. SQL standard for delineating text is a single quote. So I can put in the name field, address, suburb. Now postcode I've actually put in as an integer, so it doesn't need the quotes, but quite frankly it doesn't matter if you do put them in. So the postcode, email, and phone. It's a bit long, but you get the idea. Now I should point out at this point in time that these values must be in the same order that you created them in your database. Now, if you wanted to put them in some other order for some reason, then it's important that you would tell it what order you're going to do them. You know, ID, then name, then phone, and then you'd have to put these in that same order that you're typing them here. But we don't have to do that because we're putting them in the correct order, and we're putting all of the fields in, including the ID with this default. So that is the query done. Next, we're going to send that off, and just as we did before, we're going to use mySQL query. We have to tell it what connection to use. You can have multiple connections, by the way. That's interesting. Connected multiple databases on your servers. Now, the other thing you'll notice is I've simply put that down as the statement without actually putting it into a variable. Everything else we do with mySQL query before we put it into the result variable, we don't have to do that here. But what we're going to do is we're going to check that this has worked. Because if it hasn't worked, we're going to send an error back to index.php. Now, it's highly unlikely it won't work, but this is considered good practice. So I'm going to wrap my mySQL query, in fact, I'm going to get rid of that semicolon, into an if statement. And I actually want to say if it's not worked. So in C-based languages, the exclamation point is the not function. So if this connection inserting this data does not work, I want to send back an error message. All right. We send back to another page using the header location. Now, headers are sent with every web page, and if we amend that header before we actually print anything to the page, then what that has the effect of doing is redirecting from this page back to our index.html, PHP. But there's actually a bit of a shortcut to that. We can simply say, go back to the root. Now, we did say we wanted to send an error. So to do that, we can go question mark, and then error equals the number 1. So a number 1 error is we couldn't insert the data for some reason. We don't know what that reason is. We're not even worried about that. Now, if that all works, then it won't be doing this header, and we want to just return to it as per normal. And so what we can do is we can say, same again, header, and inside we're going to go change the location back up to there. Now we can either not send an error message, which means it just goes back to the form, we're ready for our next person, which is probably the most convenient. You could go error equals 0, saying there was no error. But what we're going to do next is a little intrusive if you do that. So I'm just going to leave it as, let's go back up 1 from the utilities folder, back up to the main folder's index. And that's our add.php. So I'm going to save that. It's having a little complaint there, syntax error, unexpected variable name. Usually when you get an error like that in PHP, it's because you've forgotten to put a semicolon on the end of the previous line. Now in PHP, this error won't go away until I save it again. I just did that, so that's all working nicely. All right, let's go back over to index.php. And we're going to disconnect this from JavaScript for now. And instead of posting to JavaScript, we're going to give this form an action. And that action is go to the utils folder and send the data to add. Saving, jumping back over to my browser, wherever it is. Oh, we've gone small. Me and my keys. Just refresh that just to get a nice fresh one. Let's go for Betty Boop. 12. Oh no. John lives there, doesn't he? 1313 Mockingbird. Has anybody come up with where that is a reference? I think we had her in Ormo. And that's 4208. B Boop. Yahoo. I don't remember what I put. 5543. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, now what I'm expecting now, we've taken out that, the return false thing that stopped it from doing its default of refreshing. We're sending it to add, and then add is sending it back to here. So what I'm expecting is Betty will appear here, and she does. Notice that Betty Boop has come up before John because we told it to order by name. And if we go over to our database, it has to reload. You can see we now have 2 pieces of data. So our PHP has worked perfectly. Put it in there. When this page refreshed, our friends list have picked up the changes. And so that's how PHP can actually put information into your persistent store, into your database. Next thing we'll do is we'll look at the delete. And then I think I've got one little treat for you at the end, just to make those panels come up in a slightly nicer way. Okay, let's get this delete happening. For that, I'm going to go over to my utilities folder and I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it delete.php. I'm going to give it the opening PHP tag. We're going to obviously connect to the database. We're going to get the ID to delete. We'll send that across from our little delete button that we'll do in a minute. Excuse me. Create the query. Dispatch query. And finally, we're going to return to the address book. Alright, you should know this one by now. Includes, up one level from utils into includes, DB header. Now, when we gathered all the information from the form, we used the post global variable. We're going to do it slightly differently this time. We're going to say $ID equals $_underscore get the ID. Now, post actually is when it sort of gets posted across in the background. Get actually puts it into the address line, so I'll show you how that works in a moment. So we now have the ID of the person we want to delete. Again, SQL is a very straightforward language, so we're going to go query equals delete from addresses, where ID equals $ID. Gets interpreted as a variable, so it's going to be a number. We are going to dispatch the query. Look, for something like this, I don't even bother checking whether it works. So I'm just going to go for MySQL query, con query, keep it nice and simple, put a semicolon on the end, and we're going to use header again. Location colon // Now, not a bad idea to send back the error equals 0. Okay, there's been no error, but that's a flag to say something has happened. So we can interpret that on the next page. So let's do that now. We're going to save that. Oh, before we do that, we should go across to index. Oh, looks like I've forgotten a semicolon again. Don't know why I keep doing that. Going back to index.php, and we want to actually deal with this delete button here. Now what we want to do is we want to actually get it to call that page, but it's not part of the form, so we can't do that as a natural, whenever you click a button you submit the form type of thing. So we're going to have to use some JavaScript to do this. So for JavaScript, we're going to give it the on-click event handler. Now here we actually want to put something inside single quotes because we've already got this inside double quotes. And here's the quandary. We're going to call a piece of JavaScript, if I can spell, delFriend, and we need to pass it the ID. Now, didn't you say, Mr. Blair, that if you put it inside single quotes, this wouldn't get interpreted as a variable? I did, but the whole thing is actually, as far as PHP is concerned, that's just a piece of text in there inside double quotes. So those double quotes allow you to use variable names in this manner. And then we're going to say, when we click it, we want to run a thing called delFriend out of JavaScript. Now we don't have a delFriend yet, so let's go across to our JavaScript and create one. We did that in main.js, and main.js has a whole lot of information in there, none of which is now pertinent. So I'm going to delete the lot. And we're going to create a function, delFriend, doing it again, equals some parameters. And that parameter, of course, is going to be the ID that we're passing in. And I can just call it ID. And this is literally going to be a one-liner as soon as I can find it in my notes. 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, back. Now, with JavaScript, we can actually tell the browser window to change its location by simply going window.location. And what we want to happen is we're going to replace the current page in the browser with the utils folder, the delete.php file, and now we're going to put a question mark, ID equals, and we're going to do our $ID string template. And Mr. Blair's just realised that he's done something wrong here. He should be using backticks for string templates, not single quotes. Whoops. So now you get ID passed in from PHP. We're going to replace the current location with this new location, which happens to be the delete file which was created. And on the command line, sorry, not on the command line, in the address, we're going to give it ID equals, and then whatever number was passed in. So let's save that one. Let's use Windows keys to save that one. I did forget to save that, so let's go back and do that. Now in theory, that should be working, so let's go give it a shift refresh because it has to pick up those changes. Remember, it's not automatically refreshing like live server. Now if I go over there and decide that Betty's no longer my friend, I should be able to press the delete key and I get an error. So that error was caused by the fact that I'd forgotten back here in delete.php to put in a question mark before that. First part says go back up one level to the index, whatever that happens to be. And then we're going to pass in a variable error equals 0 That's what the question mark does, passes in a variable. So now after I fix that up, I can delete Betty and she will just disappear from there. And of course I can add a new person, James, whatever his name is. Don't even need to put an address and everything in. I could just give him an email of jamesw at microsoft.com, add him in and he'll just appear there, and I can delete him just as easily. So it's all working nicely. Alright, one last thing that I think we should do, and this is going to happen in our styles main.css. So that's all working quite nicely. We should deal with the errors as well, so I might do that as well. But for now, let's go in and just make these things come up. These panels with our new friends details in, come up that little bit nicer. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an animation. So I'm going to slide to the bottom where you should see your friend panel. And we're going to create what's called a keyframe animation. And we do that with @keyframes. Then we give it a name, let's call it fade. And then we can say at 0% as you're loading, we want to transform the scale to be 0. So at 0%, when you first start loading, the size of this div is going to be 0. At 100%, once we've finished loading, you guessed it, transform scale 100%. I could have said 0% there too as well. That doesn't matter. Alright, so that's our animation. Fades in from 0, it's going to scale up to 100%. To use that, all we have to do is go up to our friend panel and we can add the animation in by name. We give it a timing and then a method of coming in, and ease in out will kind of come in slowly at first, quickly in the middle, and then slowly at the end, but you're not going to notice that because it's only half a second as an animation. So I'm going to save it. Don't forget to shift refresh because we're picking up changes in a, you can already see that mine's cheated. I've already got that in there. As I do the shift refresh, you can see that animation happening. Don't forget to do shift refresh because we've changed the CSS and you just saw what the panel did there. If you didn't, let's go add Betty back in. So we got Betty, we got 1313, we got Ormo, we got 4208. Beep boop. And her telephone number. As we add her in, the panels will fade up from 0. So that's just a nice little animation for you to finish off. We have neglected, or I have neglected, to look at the errors that we're sending back from our SQL, from our PHP files. So let's quickly do that one. But I want to do this a little bit differently. The way I'm going to do this I don't like. You'll see why in a minute. But I'm going to do it this way anyway, just to prove a point. So we're going to do this in our index.php down the bottom here. I'm going to do it up here in the head section. So just after the link, I'm going to break into PHP again and give myself a block. And we're going to do this in here. Now you remember we're sending back error equals 1, error equals 0. So what we can actually do is we can find out whether or not they've been sent back, and if they have, put up a specific message. Now I'm going to do that here deliberately, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually write JavaScript using PHP. So anything you want to send down to your browser from Apache can be written by PHP, which is really very clever. So what we're going to do is check whether an error has been sent back, either 1 or 0, and we're going to put up an appropriate message. So to check whether we have this variable sent back to us, we can say if the variable is set, and that variable is underscore get error. So if a variable error has been sent back to us through the get method in the address line, we're going to do something. What are we going to do? We're going to write an opening script tag back in PHP. Yes, PHP can write JavaScript. And that's actually quite powerful. You can be getting things from databases and putting them into JavaScript objects so that they're much easier and faster to manipulate inside your apps, which is really very cool. Anything that can be sent by Apache, so that's JavaScript, CSS, or HTML, can be sent to Apache from PHP. I'll just close that script off. And in between here, I'm going to use a decision-making thing. It's like an if-then-else, but it's for multiple decisions. And it's called a switch case. So we're going to switch based on the value of that error. I might just spread this out a fraction, just so this bit's a little easier to read. Alright, in the case that we get a 0 for that error, we're going to create a message that says a friend has been deleted. Now whenever we make a case like this and we do something, we have to break so that it doesn't do both cases at the same time. I'll let you look into that. So a case of 1, if you recall, that means something went wrong. Please try again. Now, the reason I'm making it a switch instead of just doing an if-then-else is that I can actually add more cases to this. Don't forget your break. I can actually add as many cases as I like to this. And you could have all different parts of your app sending back different error messages, and you can interpret them all here. Last thing I'm going to do is, after that, I've got this message but I haven't done anything with it. So I'm going to echo a JavaScript alert box, and inside that I'm going to tell that message something. So now when I add someone, nothing's going to happen unless something goes wrong. Or if I delete someone, it's going to put up a message saying we've deleted someone. Now you're going to find this is quite annoying and obtrusive. I'll show you a better way to do it in a second. But just to prove that we can write JavaScript and have it working perfectly fine in our browser, I'm going to get out of that and go save. I'm going to jump back into here. Don't forget we have to pick that up with a shift refresh, just making sure. Alright, now when we delete Betty Boop, it's going to come up with a message saying we've deleted a friend. So I'm going to hit delete. A friend has been deleted. Now like I said, this is a bit obtrusive. Your page doesn't load until we hit OK. And Betty Boop's gone. So a better way to do that was really just to prove to you that we can actually do this sort of thing in write JavaScript using PHP. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do, we're going to take this and we're going to use it, but we're going to use it in the actual HTML a little further down. So I'm going to cut it out of there and I'm going to get rid of all of this PHP. Now, probably maybe at the top. Let's do this. I'm going to break into PHP. I'm going to, should have taken this as well. If is set $_get, oops, square brackets, the error. So we're only going to do this if there is an error. Then I'm going to paste back in that switch. And then I'm going to go echo P, and I'm going to put in the message, but I'm going to do this color style red. So now we're going to get a red error message if that is sent back. Save that. Jump back over to here. We're going to shift, and it says our friend's been deleted because that's the last thing we did. And that, my ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the address book tutorial. Sorry for fumbling over bits and pieces and getting a little confused between Windows and Mac, etc. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you've learnt some skills that you can use on into the future. Thanks for listening.